Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us to chat. I have issue 12 right here featuring Moses and your story with him, which turned out so great. And the pictures are so beautiful.
Mhm.
And I wanted to know, just to start, why are you excited about the possibility of chatting with Moses and getting to know him a little bit better? Like, why was he particularly an interesting character for you?
Well, I just think he's a really brilliant artist, and I really like artists. I mean, I just like creative people. And I think that there's a certain, like unceasing authenticity to the way he goes about making stuff that I just, as a writer myself, I just find exciting to be around. So, and also just personally, like I went to school for theater, and I there's a lot of theatrical elements in his work, both
Mm.
musically and visually. But I studied theater in a way that was like I went to NYU. I was an experimental theater wing, so I like kind of like came up in the tradition of all this downtown work, all this downtown New York work, and so it was just really exciting to see his like connection to that. I just think he makes beautiful pieces. Period. And he's always like messing with form and pushing like genre in new directions, and I thought that was cool. I also thought he just sounds so good. Like everything he makes just sounds like butter, and
Mhm.
he's also just so beautiful to look at. So it was like an opportunity to like go and just like hang out with this guy was like a no-brainer for me.
Yeah, totally. I've seen him perform once. I was lucky enough to see him like the Monday right before we went into lockdown, which was kind of
Mm,
a very fitting way to kind of go out
mm,
in this kind of
mm.
like ethereal space. But yeah, well, first of all, he's very tall.
Yes,
He's like a giant
yes,
man, and he's so striking to look at. He's
yes, he
such
is.
a beautiful presence.
Yeah.
And when I saw him perform, I mean, he's like totally in control. He
Yeah,
is in command of
yeah.
his performance and of his stage and of his band. Um, and so I'm wondering if it was challenging at all to kind of approach him or chat with him. I saw in your contributors note here you said that you thought he might actually be less easy to talk to than he was because his work is so experimental. You said you were prepared in some sense for the possibility of pretension. And
Right,
I was
right.
wondering if that was like what your experience was, or if you had to kind of like work through any sort of barriers or anything like that.
I mean, I don't, yeah, like, I mean, there's a thing about LA. I grew up partially in LA, and so I have this very particular personal relationship with like the beautiful people of LA.
Yeah.
Because like if you look like a regular person, then you always feel like you're surrounded. Because LA is like this weird kind of funnel where all of the beautiful people from every city and town in the world all like converge. New York has a little bit of that too, and
Mm.
so going from high school to LA to college in New York, I always felt like I like at a certain point in my life just felt like, no, this is not, those aren't my people. Like, I just can't, I'm not like 6'5" and like weigh like 107 pounds and have a six pack. And so I think probably I was concerned that like there might be some of that there for him because he makes this kind of like highfalutin art and he's like this really beautiful supermodel type. And so I was thought that maybe that was going to happen. We were meeting at an LA place that was like super surrounded by models and actors and just like the classic thing. But there was none of that. He was like so chill and down to earth. And I quickly recognized, probably the first thing I recognized about his personality is that he is, his focus is on his work. And
Mm.
that's pretty much what it's, he wants to talk about the work. He wants to talk about its influences. He wants to talk about where it comes from, how he created it. And that I can relate to because that's the way my brain works. I'm interested in like the process, the craft, the creation. I can go on about that for days. So yeah, it was whatever doubts I had. He quickly dispelled them just by the manner of his presence.
Yeah. I was listening to your interview on the long form podcast earlier this week while I was thinking about chatting with you, and one of the things that you kind of struck me was you said you're always looking for ways that you can relate to a subject or a topic or something, and to kind of find your way in to a story. So it sounds like one of those ways was connecting just through the fact that you guys are both extremely hard workers, which I also want to talk to you about. That's one of my questions for you, just the sheer number of projects you have going on. But I wondered too if like sense of place, if you are able to connect it all around like California, and kind of his relationship to California or your relationship to California, because you write beautifully about kind of how California kind of affects you kind of throughout, and Moses throughout the piece.
Yeah, I think anyone who grew up in LA, there's a certain affinity that we recognize in one another, because LA is I mean, the thing that always strikes me about LA is that it's a very wistful, nostalgic feeling to that town. You know, underneath all of the like ridiculousness and all the like ridiculous behavior, there's something about the quality of sunlight and the fact that every day presents this like hopeful sunlight that gives you a feeling that there's just a weird hopefulness underneath it. And then as life unfolds, being the way it is, sometimes hopeful, sometimes not, I think a lot of people pick up a kind of melancholy because there's the juxtaposition of this hopefulness and also this like, you know, just the slog of being alive. And so I felt like I did connect with him on that. I also connect with him around the feeling of like being a Black artist who's like interested in this wide, disparate kind of like sense of influences, like all the pop music, like weird like Japanese electronica that you discovered in high school because someone told you it was cool, and like, and then hip hop, and then like R&B, and just like having all those influences and having to find your voice within that, knowing that every room you go into, there's someone in there that you relate to and who also thinks that something about you is weird and had never seen it before. I really got that sense from him of what it, you know, like that he has gone through the world always having, there's a certain, I don't want to say loneliness, but there's some kind of something to that. And I really got that sense from him, or at least that's what I sensed, and that's what I wrote about. Because the thing is, as a writer, you can only write it it doesn't matter if you're writing like someone else, you're still writing your own point of view. And so that's what I saw in him. Another person might see him and think about his fashion and just write, you know, for like 120 words about how he was dressed, because that's what they saw that reflects them. But that sort of like artistic isolation that comes from having a lot of different influences and having to find people to connect with through all the different parts of your identity, that's what I related to.
Yeah. Well, that definitely came through in the piece. I think it's interesting because there's so many layers to him, and he does kind of toe this line of like feeling kind of complicated and inaccessible and like over there in some mystical way, but manages to also be extremely relatable, I think, and speak to themes that a lot of people feel all at once. And I think that kind of tension is part of what makes him so interesting. But Moses is certainly not the first celebrity or only celebrity you've interviewed. I know you've chatted with everyone from Viola Davis to Riz Ahmed to Samuel L. Jackson to Mahershala Ali. You're kind of a pro at this point, probably, of like getting under the surface a little bit. And I'm wondering if you can share anything about kind of how you prepare to interview celebrities, I think in particular, who may have like a bit of a guard up, having this be kind of a part of their job in a sense, and anything about kind of what's your secret to kind of cracking the celebrity profile genre?
I don't know that I've cracked it. I mean, I feel like there's a big process of observation that has to happen before you go meet with a person. Where I spend a lot of time looking at the person's entire body of work, all their interviews, all their movies, all their albums, and I start to look for what are the main questions that this person embodies. What tensions in society do they represent? Because tension makes for good reading and good conversation. And so that's probably the one thing, is that I look through all the work with that question of, you know, what is the thing that this person's work means in the world? Another thing is that I love to start off by talking with people about what their day has been like up until that point, because the way that they describe whatever they went through, whether it was just like, oh, just traffic was from here to there or whatever, however they describe their day tells you a lot about what's important to them in the world, how they view the world. And then I want to start asking questions about that. Usually when I go into an interview, I really only have like one or two big questions that I want to ask. And I used to start off when I first started interviewing, I'd come in with like 1,000 questions.
Yeah.
I'd be like, like reading my own notes. But then I quickly realized you can't have a good conversation that way, because you say something, they answer it, and then they sit back and wait for you to ask your next question, because they're aware that you're operating in the sense of, I have this list of questions and we're going to get through them. And that doesn't make for good conversation. So to me, conversation is the main thing. I'm going to ask people just to say more about that thing. And I'm going to form my questions based on what they just said. That's interesting that you pointed that out. That makes me think of this thing. What do you think of that? And then we kind of get it back and forth. And I think that's like the key to getting people beyond their PR mode. And most artists, I don't think, just like most people, they don't want to keep it surface unless they have some reason to distrust you specifically. They want to be able to talk. They're just waiting for you to show that you can handle their actual conversation. Is the way I think of it.
Yeah, show that you're actually listening.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I often think of that celebrity interview where that guy was interviewing Jerry Lewis. I don't know if anyone's seen this. It's kind of a masterclass in a bad celebrity interview. And it's like a young guy was trying to interview Jerry Lewis, who at that point was this was like 3 years ago. So he was in his 70s, 80s, 90s maybe. And the guy just kept being like, so you're old. How do you feel about being old? And Jerry Lewis was just not giving this kid any of the time of day. And I just watched how this guy just continued to stay hewed to the questions on his page, and Jerry Lewis would not give him that. It was amazing, and it really reminded me of why it's important to have a conversation with a person, to find out what they want to talk about, and to let them talk about what they want to talk about, rather than just go in and like run off your list of things. Two things you think might actually be really important. Did I lose you there?
Yeah. I feel like I've seen. Oops, sorry. Still got you?
No. Yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Okay, sorry. Thought I lost you for a second. Yeah, I gotcha. It reminds me of kind of similar interviews I've seen with like women in particular. I'm thinking of one with like Christina Hendricks, where the interviewer kept asking her about how she felt about being kind of representative of like plus size women, and she was like, and she just kept going there, and like she finally just like got up and walked away, because she was like, I don't want to talk about this. I'm an actress, like that's my job. That's what I would like to discuss.
That's right. And it's hard. I mean, it's hard if you're a young reporter or you don't have a lot of experience and you feel like your editor wants this take. And I think that there's a little bit of work that comes in that too. Like if you have to, if your editor is like, yes, go talk to Christina Hendricks about being a plus size person, then it's kind of on you to say, that's something interesting, but also here's some other interesting stuff. And you have to kind of negotiate with your editor before you go in, so that you don't put yourself in the position of kind of making an ass of yourself in front of the person that you're interviewing.
Yeah, so true. So true. Yeah, I love all of that. And I think it really comes through in obviously your writing about these people, which is not at all surface level. The Mahershala piece for GQ, truly some incredible writing and insights there. And I would encourage everyone to go read that if they haven't already. It is really as much about you as it is about him in a way, which I think is what makes it such a compelling piece of writing.
Thank you.
But then, of course, celebrity writing is not the only thing that you do. I mean, the amount of output that you have is like kind of overwhelming to me. You, in addition to writing, you're on Slate's parenting podcast called Mom and Dad Are Fighting. You have concepted and created 2 of your own podcasts. One called Finding Fred about Mr. Rogers, which came out at the end of last year.
Yeah.
And then just a couple of years ago, the podcast Closer Than They Appear about race and identity in the U.S. I also believe you're working on 2 books right now.
Yes. The short answer is yes. Yeah. The
Okay.
long answer is there may. Yeah.
Okay. In addition to kind of all of this magazine reporting, so that's a lot.
It
Do you
is.
also have 24 hours in a day, or like Beyonce, do you have more?
Well, I just want to say I want to take this opportunity to announce that we just found out this morning that Finding Fred was nominated for a Peabody Award.
Oh,
Which
that's
thank
huge.
you. Yeah,
That's
which
major.
is
Congratulations.
yeah. I woke up to that news this morning and it's like I'm kind of still buzzing from it. So that's pretty cool.
Wow.
I mean, I think that for me, the thing it's like I don't really work on multiple stuff at once. I just have multiple projects in process at once.
That's okay.
Um, so I think of it as multiple projects in process, like an assembly line. So I was working on Closer Than They Appear while I was writing the Andre Iguodala book, while I was working on some. But it's like you go through these phases. It's like Closer Than They Appear. Now we're in the studio. We're working. We're really writing the Andre book. I'm just doing preliminary research, and so you just kind of calendar these things along in their various blocks.
Mm.
I don't work that much, actually, even though it looks like there's a lot of output.
Tell
Um,
me your secret,
I'm a
please.
terrible procrastinator. I'm an obsessive compulsive procrastinator. I will spend all day making bread, sweeping under my bed, like, you know what I mean? Like researching bikes on, the internet. Like I just will waste time incessantly. And that time is useful because that's the time I spend trying to understand the idea on a deeper level.
Mm.
And invariably, I'll be watching something entirely unrelated. I'll be watching, The Office, episode 6 of The Office for like the 900th time. And then in
Mm-hmm.
the middle of episode 14, I'll be like, that's what Fred was about. Like, that's it. It was this thing about relationship, and then it'll be some weird joke between Angela and Pam will suddenly make me realize what is this piece truly, really about. So I value that time. I also pull all-nighters at deadline. I'm like a classic writer in the sense of like, there's that meme that's like the writer's process is like the work is assigned and then most of the time graph is like, fuck this, I'm not doing it. And then there's like
Yeah.
tiniest, sliver of preliminary research. And then there's crying and writing. And then there's
Yeah.
deadline. And that's pretty much how I do everything. Especially written pieces. When I work in a team, I can't do that, so the podcasts don't come that way, which is nice.
Yeah.
But when
Yeah.
I'm alone and I just have a thing assigned, I typically do it last minute. I've tried to cut all-nighters out of my life altogether because I'm way too old for that. And the Moses piece, actually, I had a breakthrough where I was like, just when I looked at my schedule, I was like, I'm not going to want to be up on like, it was like Monday when I interviewed him or whatever. I'm not going to want to be up Friday night, like trying to get this thing to you guys at 6 a.m. on Saturday. So after Moses was over, I had about 4 hours before my plane took off. And sorry. And my daughter keeps calling. I just went in a cafe and continued and just wrote it. I just like banged it out.
Yeah.
And that was really good. And I always wish that I could write like that, but I can't always. Here, let me text her and tell
You
her.
can't force that though.
No, you can't force it.
Yeah, like either it comes or it doesn't.
Yes, exact. Well, I mean, although the longer I do it, the more I realize that writing is in fact something that you have to just practice, even if you don't, like I've started to really do more word counts and really just be like, look, I'm going to get 1,000 words done today, even if they suck. I'm still going to do
Really?
it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I always say there's nothing more inspiring than a deadline.
The deadlines
like,
to this day is the only thing that can truly, genuinely motivate me to get stuff done. Yeah.
Yeah. So true. Well, from the outside, it certainly looks like you're balancing it all, and you must be working, 20 hours a day to get it all done. So you have us fooled for sure.
Yes. Tell me about how things are going for you guys.
Things are going pretty well. We are kicking off our 13th issue, actually. So even though we just put out this guy last week, media doesn't really rest.
It doesn't rest. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're on to the next, and we're really thinking about how we can make, this issue came together really well before any of what's happening in the world was happening.
Right.
It's kind of an issue as normal. Like there's stories about travel, and my team traveled for this issue. Shout out to the team who's watching right now.
Mm-hmm.
But for this next issue, we're really thinking through ways that we can address, COVID-19 kind of head on in terms of how it's impacting us and how it's impacting travel and how it's impacting kind of how we move through the world. So it's a pretty exciting and overwhelming a little bit kind of creative opportunity that we're really excited to sink our teeth into. But I think ultimately we couldn't just kind of forge ahead with an issue as normal about travel, given what's happening in the world. So it is a moment for us to kind of pause and document kind of this collective moment that we're in. So it's exciting, and that's really what's been on our mind for the past like week or so, and what we're kind of forging ahead with over the next month.
That sounds amazing. That's really good. Yeah, I think there's plenty of opportunities to kind of get to what the core spiritual truth is of travel, and how do we find that in this new space.
Exactly. And I think there's a lot to be said around travel moving really quickly and becoming really, really accessible in the last, decade. And is that a good thing? And are we being maybe as intentional or thoughtful as we should be when we are booking flights and taking, 1 million 48-hour trips a year? Is that the approach that we should be taking for ourselves and for kind of the environment and the world that we live in? So,
that another thing that I always think about when I travel is the increasing sense that when you go to another place, it's just because everything is so connected, it feels like a slightly different version of the same place that you just left, because the internet is there, the Starbucks is there, you know what I mean? Like
Uber is there.
Yeah, exactly. And the first time I did international travel was like 1990 something. Well, I went to Jamaica when I was like 12 with my dad, but even that, like, that feeling was like we were in a different world. There was no link to the America I knew and the Jamaica that we experienced. And increasingly places I go seem to be working to feel like you're just at home. And I'm just wondering about, like, again, is that a good thing, or do I miss, which I think I do, the feeling that when I travel, I actually am going away, as opposed to I'm taking my here somewhere else,
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, we are all, it's kind of this catch-22, because like we love that there are so many flights, and we love that you can get an Uber, and it is so easy, and we have Google Maps, so you can kind of like get around super seamlessly. But there's really something to be said for like figuring out the metro wherever you are, and like using a paper map. And like, I don't know, I remember so much of what I learned about like the geography of our country was looking at a map in the back seat of like the rental van that my parents got to like drive us from St. Louis to Colorado to go to the national parks, which was like most of our family travel experience. And like me like pretending to navigate and kind of understanding like the true lay of the land. And that doesn't really happen anymore, because you just like go put in your hotel name and press directions.
Exactly.
And then like you're just kind of blindly following. So
I always think about this this college girlfriend I had who was going to Mexico, and I was like helping her pack, and I was like, oh, we have to get batteries. And she was like, oh, I'll just get batteries there. And I was like, where would you get batteries there? You have to figure it out. She was like, that's the fun part. And it was like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. I love that. Yeah. So there's a lot to like sink our teeth into there. And I think, like a lot of things right now, travel is going through like a bit of a reckoning process. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. So very curious to kind of see what the other side of this looks like. But last question, which is related to travel, since we can't physically go anywhere right now, I'm wondering how you're still finding ways to escape or find a sense of escapism kind of in this current moment.
Yeah, I'm actually working on an essay about that right now. I'm kind of like bi-coastal. Like spent many years in New York and many years in California, and I always think I might go back to New York at some point when my kids are older and out of the house. The thing I'm now realizing about California during COVID is that it's so beautiful here.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, especially in Northern California, we can drive a half hour in any direction and be in a landscape that looks like nothing that we know of in the city.
Yeah.
Just like crazy hills, like beautiful fields of wildflowers, especially now. You can go north and be on these like phenomenal cliffside, like with the ocean, just like the Pacific just spread out in front of you. Some of the most beautiful landscape that still to this day, of all the places I've been, some of the most beautiful landscape I've seen is right here in Northern California.
Yeah.
And COVID has ironically made it easier to get to these places because there's no traffic. The Bay
Yeah.
Area is wildly congested traffic wise. So things that used to take 95 minutes to get to now take like 20 minutes to get
Yeah.
to. And
Wow.
so we're doing these just like on Sundays, we're just doing these long road trips where we just drive around and look at beautiful things. And,
Yeah.
there's a limit to how much, we get out of the car and we're like on the beach and then the sheriff pulls up and is like, you guys can't park here. So then we go back in the car, but then people, then we go back and, it's like this kind of
Yeah.
constant dance, but like that having the ability to go and see big, beautiful things, within like 20 or 30 miles of where we live is like, I'm now really appreciating that on a new level. So that's kind of what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds lovely. I'm so
Yeah.
glad you're finding a way to kind of um, find kind of something beautiful in this
Yeah.
time. I think
Yeah.
we're all kind of really understanding that it's not like the beautiful things are not overly complicated. They're pretty easy to find if you know to look.
Well, in fact, that is kind of what I think that might be in some sense one of the essences of the thing is that, my dad, I'm writing about this in this essay. My dad, we were pretty, he didn't have a lot of money. And when my kids were younger, I didn't have a lot of money. And we did the same thing, which is that he would always find these missions for us to do in the city. This was in DC during the
Mm.
summers. He'd find these missions to do that were like fascinating, but didn't cost any money. Like he would just take us to this park where we could watch the planes take off. And so we would just sit there for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and just watch planes take off from DC National Airport, which is
Mm-hmm.
now called Reagan. And stuff like that. When my kids were little, we would just pick a bus line in Oakland and just ride it all the way to the end. And they would just sit on their knees and look out the window and watch the whole city pass by. And it cost like $3.30 or whatever for all of us to do it.
Yeah.
And it was a whole adventure. And I do feel like beauty, we're taught that capitalism teaches us that beauty is this thing you have to go out and pay
Yeah.
for and be able to afford.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that that's right. I don't think that that's how
Mm-hmm.
we should look at the world. And I think that like there's a cost to viewing the world that way on
Mm-hmm.
many, many levels.
Yeah.
And maybe one thing coming out of this is that we're returning to the idea that we have to find beauty in front of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I certainly hope you and I are not the only ones kind of thinking through that right now. Um, and I think that's a really lovely note to end on, actually. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank
I
you.
really
Definitely.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
And good luck with your work and
Thank you.
stay well and
Yeah.
safe out there in
Yeah.
Oakland.
Same to you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye.
everyone for joining us. Bye.
Bye.